Juanita Jean Nelson was a 17-year-old from Boulder Creek, California. She was the second of 5 kids and was the most outgoing of them all. On the morning of December 13th, 1998, plans were made for Juanita to ride the bus to school, something she rarely did, while their mother drove the other children to a different one. When they left, Juanita was home alone. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. I get the title for today's episode from a comment a member of the Unfound podcast discussion group made when I posted that this would be today's case. He said this case, Juanita's, is straightforward. I'm sure he got this idea from the many places online where we are led to believe that there is only one possibility in Juanita's disappearance. That her case is just a matter of finding one more piece of evidence to pin this missing persons case and probable murder on a specific person. Yet I'm not convinced this commenter is correct. This is not to call this commenter out. In fact, I still make assumptions on cases when I first find out about them, only then to learn very quickly how wrong I was when I get to speak with a future guest. Many times the cases aren't as portrayed in the media, that facts get left out, that things are taken for granted, that reporters shy away from other possibilities due to their own incompetence or because the truth might be just too much for the public to hear. Because in Juanita's case, and contrary to information that is on the record, you're going to hear how she wasn't supposed to walk to school that day. That the main suspect was never seen in the vicinity of her house despite people being home. In fact, in the interview, you will hear how there were signs that Juanita may have never left for school at all. And when we are done, and all of the unknown facts are presented, we can all start to understand why this disappearance is still unresolved, and why, so far, the investigation has gone straight forward to nowhere. And now, a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Goodsite, charlieproject.org. Juanita Nelson, by all accounts, was a handful, both for her parents and her siblings. She had run away many times, on her own, with friends, and with her boyfriend, Graham Farmer, even making it to Idaho once. She skipped class to the point she was reassigned to a school 18 miles away, where urine tests for drugs were administered monthly. Juanita got into car chases that resulted in wrecks and injuries to herself. Yes, she had a wild and troubled childhood. But this could possibly be traced to her being sexually abused by a neighbor when she was a little girl. The man went to jail, but not until Juanita's mother tracked this predator's felony record down in Kansas, so that prosecutors would take the charges seriously. Yet in the months before Juanita's disappearance, she seemed to have straightened a lot of these problems out. In fact, she and Graham were hardly even a couple anymore. So, on the morning of December 13th, 1998, the plan was for Juanita to ride the bus to school. Usually, her mother drove her. However, at the time, Juanita's parents were going through a divorce, and her mother had just started a new job that she didn't want to be late for. Thus, Juanita's mother gave her money to ride the bus, and instead would give her other 3 children a ride to their school, which was much closer. They left, leaving Juanita home alone. She would presumably start her walk to the bus stop shortly, yet Juanita never arrived at school. She was never seen again. Later that day, the things Juanita would have usually taken with her to school, her wallet, her food, and the bus fare, were found in the house, exactly where they were when her mother and siblings left. Juanita's case was not taken seriously at first due to her running away so many times. But these are the issues that have arisen since Juanita's disappearance. Number 1, an alleged sighting of Juanita on December 14th, the day after. Number 2, Graham Farmer going to jail a few years later for abusing his new girlfriend. And number 3, the search of Juanita's father's property in Oregon due to him being considered a suspect. Juanita's mother and siblings believe foul play is a strong possibility, although they recognized that Juanita could have run away and decided not to return. The guest for this episode is Juanita's youngest sister, Katie Nelson. Unfound news. Something new is coming to Patreon, and I hope it will encourage you to become a supporter. At patreon.com on February 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern, I will start a live video show for contributors on the tiers of $10 a month and up. I expect it to be a little more intimate and personal than the show I do on Wednesdays, and yes, that show will continue on YouTube with no changes. I love doing that show. But the Patreon show will be different in that I will be talking about the preceding episode from that Friday, and I will get to discuss it with the Patreon people in depth. We will be able to trade insights and opinions, and hopefully we can come up with new ideas that can be passed along to the families. And yes, I'll take general questions from the audience there as well. I hope you will consider joining. Next, I'm starting to go back through Unfound's old cases, the ones from 2016 and into 2017. I'm listening to the interviews and reassessing my opinions on what I believe happened in those disappearances. I'm trying to apply my experience of 115 cases to those first Unfound episodes when I had very little experience, if any at all. This has already paid off in the case of Ashley Eifert. Her mother, Yvonne, posted in the Unfound podcast discussion group how she discovered a fairly large mistake regarding Ashley's case, something that had been wrong since the beginning. This happened after I had listened to the interview I did with Yvonne back in 2017, then called her to talk about it. I hope we can have some more success stories like that as I go back through the old episodes. And finally, I'm back in Florida. It is great to be here. I left Pennsylvania just before that polar vortex hit, and that is not a coincidence. So I'm now back at Unfound headquarters, and I hope to get a lot of work done in 2019. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Contribute to Unfound at patreon.com/Unfound Podcast. This week I need to thank Jasmine, Heather, and Barbara. You can also contribute at PayPal, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. That is also the email address. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. Merchandise, the books at amazon.com in both ebook and print form. Don't forget the reviews. Shirts at myshopify.com. Cards at makeplayingcards.com. And please mention Unfound at all true crime websites and forums. Thank you. A note before this interview starts, my guest Katie dropped a couple F-bombs during this interview. I left them in because I think it perfectly captured how she feels about what has gone on in her sister's case.
I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Juanita Nelson, Katie Nelson. Katie, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome, Katie. Tell the listeners a little bit about your sister Juanita. First of all, is she your older sister or younger sister?
I am the baby of 5 children,
Wow.
and she
Okay.
is my older sister. There is 6 years between us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the youngest of 5, like I said, and there are 4 girls and 1 boy, and the
Wow.
order goes Marjorie, Juanita, Holly, Nicholas, and then me, Katie.
Baby. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a pretty crowded household, Katie, if I may say. Was it?
Yes. Yes, it was.
Okay. And how do you think Juanita handled that, being second in line, being what kind of older sister was she, and what was she into, and everything?
Well, I can say from what I remember is that Juanita was always a big deal. Nobody was going to overshadow her. So even in a family of 5, she definitely, I'm not going to say that she definitely didn't let anybody forget about her. My sister was extremely intelligent. There was a little bit of kind of a rivalry with her and my older sister Marjorie, because my older sister Margie, she had to really try really, really hard like learning wise. She had a little bit more difficulties. And Margie and Juanita was the opposite in a lot of ways. Everything was really easy for her. She was very, very bright. All of her teachers said so. And I think that I definitely got lucky being the baby of my family. There's always things that the baby, gets a little bit burnt out on.
That's true.
But at the same time, because of being the baby, I got babied. My mom will say she doesn't remember potty training me because like my brothers and sisters did it. And also my relationship with Juanita was probably the best out of all of the siblings because I never did anything to piss her off. My clothes were too small for her to steal. That was something that, went on with her and Margie, which I feel like that's a pretty common sibling problem.
Yeah.
My brother Nick and her kind of butted heads sometimes. I think they both kind of competed for being, the black sheep or the bad one. My sister Holly, like they say in you take those classes where like the dysfunctional family, there's like the sister that's like the forgotten child. That's like my sister Holly. She's really quiet and she's not one to make a lot of ripples.
Yeah.
So,
and it could be that you separated by 6 years. And she was of course 17 when she disappeared, and you were 11. It's 6 years, but it seems like a lot more than that. I mean, if she were still around, if she would get to be, if she was 37, you're 31. That's different. But at 17 and 11, you two probably couldn't have been at different places in your life.
Yeah, as you get older, you bridge the gap.
Right.
I definitely see that with my siblings now, and
Yeah.
even with like my children and my nieces and nephews. When the one baby's 6 months old and the other baby's a year old, there's a lot of like more problems. But then as they both are 3, it's all different. Everything changes. That 6-month gap gets closer and closer together.
Right.
And I do feel that there is definitely a hole in a relationship that I feel like I was robbed of. I think that there would have been a lot of things in my life that I feel like Juanita would have been able to offer me understanding that my other siblings weren't able to give me,
Well, let's talk about her then. What was she into? You said she liked her attention. She needed her love. She wanted to be number one, even though she was number 2 in line. What were some of these? You remember from being 11 and she was 17? What were some of her interests? And I mean, did you even realize that maybe at the age of 11 what she was into as far as school and interest, things like that?
I didn't. I'm going to say I didn't really, because I was so young that there aren't really a lot of things that I can tell you that I remember about her. I know that my older siblings have a lot more memories, and I know that those are some things that my sister Margie, you touched on with her.
Yeah, I did talk to Marjorie.
When you interviewed her.
Yes.
And I think that I definitely, in a lot of ways, I think I got lucky, and in a lot of ways, I think I didn't.
Yeah.
Is the ignorance is bliss kind of thing. I'm lucky in that sense, but then I don't have a lot of memories. I mean, there were a couple times where we were left home alone, and Nina was babysitting me, and we weren't allowed to roller skate in the house. So there's a couple memories that I have, and one was we weren't allowed to roller skate in the house, and this is maybe a good example of, my sister. It was just me and her that day, and we pushed all the furniture back. And we put on the radio station, that TV station on basic cable that plays the songs on it. And we pretended to be figure skaters, and we danced and we roller skated around the living room. Now, we were not allowed to do that. But I remember when she watched me, we always had fun. I remember her putting my hair in a bun to be a ballerina, and her doing my makeup and sitting me on the dresser in the bathroom, and she did a lot of fun things with me, and I can tell you she didn't treat me like a pest. And I definitely was treated like that by my other siblings. And Juanita never made me feel that way. And so that's something that I can say is really special. But I mean, that's a good example of how she is. You know, she knew we weren't allowed to do that, and we did it anyway. And I was happy that we did it because it's like one of the memories that I have of her. But that's a good example of that, Juanita, when it came down to rules or boundaries or things that you weren't supposed to do. As long as somebody wasn't watching, I don't think that she felt like she had to not do it.
Yeah. And the listeners should know, you're right. I did get to talk to Marjorie, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my summation after this interview, because being that she was older than Juanita, her point of view was certainly a little different, and I will certainly talk about that afterwards. Let's move on to this. Juanita was molested as a little girl. I'm sure you didn't know that when you were 11 years old. Can you remember when you found out that happened?
Actually, I cannot tell you I remembered when I knew that happened. One thing that I could say about my family, I did know that something happened. We're very open, like a very, very open family. So things were probably discussed in front of me as a kid that most parents would have chose to shelter their kids from. And so I did know that something happened. I didn't understand it, but I knew that something happened to Holly and Juanita. And as I got older, I heard the real story, and, I did speak with my mother about it last night. And how they found out was the man that lived next door to us, he moved into the neighborhood. He had 2 children and a wife, and the wife kind of ran some kind of daycare thing, and he was like a handyman. So a lot of the people around the neighborhood had hired him to do odd jobs around their house or whatever. And one woman down the road had found out from her daughter. Her daughter went and told her mother that he had done something to her. Nice. And it was that girl who was too young to testify. I think she was maybe 3 or 4. In between 3 and 4, and my sister Holly at the time was about the same age. My sister Holly also, it has to be said that she had tubes in her ears, and my sister Holly was actually deaf until the age of 2, so she didn't talk. And so when he eventually did go get convicted for what he did, he was convicted not on what he did to Juanita, but on the 2 kids that were too young to testify against him. And he ended up pleading out, where my sister Juanita was actually the only one that the DA had classified was a good witness against him to put on the stand to convict him for what he had done to her. But he pleaded out before my sister was ever able to testify against him.
Oh. And what is his name?
Michael Biggs. Okay. My mom, what happened with that is the guy that was representing him, Ben Rice, he was a district attorney at the time, he was saying all of these things in court about what had happened to Michael Biggs when he was younger, and was making all these excuses and kind of all these sob stories about why we should feel sorry for this man that molested all these kids in the neighborhood, Yeah. And my mom and the DA wasn't doing anything about it. And wasn't saying anything in court, and my mom got really, really pissed off about it. And because of that, my mom she found out where the guy came from, and the guy had come from Kansas, and she got a hold of the old phone books there, and she called the Kansas, where the town that he used to live with in Kansas, and found out the guy was on parole in Kansas for doing it to kids there.
Wow.
And my mom was the one that came and brought that all to the DA. And by the time the DA hated my mom, the defense attorney hated my mom, they actually offered my mom a job after that, because she basically did their job for them, but she also made them look really, really bad. So because of that, he had to plea out because he realized my mom had dug up so much dirt on him that like he was really going to get it.
And how old was Juanita when this happened?
Nina and Holly are a year and a half apart, so she was 5.
Wow. Okay.
But there's certain things that when you see if you can actually put a child on the stand that's that young, that you have to ask them. And like one of the first things I ask him is, do you know the truth between a lie and the truth? Do you know the truth, the difference between right and wrong? And my sister, Juanita, answered those questions to where she was actually considered competent.
Mm-hmm.
Which is another thing where you go back to the fact that my sister Juanita was very bright.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Okay.
Well, the guy out of prison.
So he just did something to Juanita and Holly, not you or Marjorie or Nick.
I was 1.
Yeah.
I was 1. I was barely even.
Yeah.
I don't remember any of it. And not Nick and not Marge. If you knew Marge, I mean, you did talk to her briefly.
Yeah.
But if you were looking for a victim, she's not the one to go for.
Right.
That's for sure. Margie is, being a predator like that, you look for people.
Yeah.
And if I don't know if I could put myself into that kind of mind frame, but I feel like Margie would probably be the worst person to target.
Yeah. And is Michael Biggs in jail today, 2019? Do you know?
He was released from prison, and he did it again. He moved to another town. He did it again, and the district attorneys in that town tracked down my sister Juanita at the age of 11 and interviewed her. She had to go down to the district attorney's office in Santa Cruz. They interviewed her, and they used that testimony to put him away forever. Actually, a couple years ago, he came up on parole, and his daughter, who he'd done all that stuff to as well, got a hold of my sister Holly. My sister Holly sent a letter and interviewed to the parole board, and his own daughter also to the parole board, and he did not make parole. And I think that was about 3 years ago. So thank God for all of our children. He is still in prison.
Okay. So Michael Biggs, he was his next door neighbor. He preyed on 2 of your sisters, Holly and Juanita, and he's still in, and that was, of course, a long time ago now. But he did it again, and now he's in jail. Let's move on to this. Also about Juanita, she liked to run away a lot, which of course adds into this case being complex. And when we talked about the details of this is what made this case a little hard to understand maybe at the beginning. What do you now, maybe at the age of 11, you didn't quite understand this, but what do you now know about it now, how she used to run away?
And she would take off, I kind of got this out of my mom last night, 3-4 days, sometimes like a week at a time, but she would always come back. But my mom did report her missing multiple times. And that's when she went to file the missing persons report. When she went missing this time, she'd only been gone a couple days, but my mom, they say, she had an intuition about this time that was different than, the others. My sister, at one point when she ran away at step 16, I'm going to say, she went all the way to Idaho with one of her friends.
Right.
She was very resourceful, They ended up making it back home. But, yeah, she was known to take off.
Okay, so she'd miss school. She'd go out maybe with this friend of hers, and we're going to talk about this guy that was in her life, Graham. We'll talk about him in a second. But she would just have this need to run off. Did she ever offer an explanation for this? Anything like that you know of?
It was a typical teenage mother and a teenage girl and mother relationship where my mom was like, you can't do this. And she was like, yeah, I can. I mean, I know that Margie told me, that she was doing hard drugs. Do I have any recollection of it, or looking back on it? I could say that, I wouldn't doubt that's what was going on with her. She had gotten in trouble and she wasn't even going to school, but she had gotten on probation, juvenile probation, and as a term of her probation, she had to go back to school, or she would go back to juvenile hall. And so at the time of her disappearance, she'd actually been clean for about 2 months, and she was going to a school that was, it had a lot of other kids that were on probation that were being P-tested weekly, and they would get P-tested at this school, and it was a finishing school. And she had to go as a term of her probation. So if she didn't show up, it would be, she was risking going to juvenile hall. So she was actually doing really, really very well.
I guess what I'm asking about the running away is like, for example, the Idaho incident. Was she planning to come back? I mean, was she waiting for somebody to get her, bring her back? Or do you think that she would have worked her whole way across the United States? Once again, I know you were just 11, but how do you interpret it now? Was she going to come back or what?
I know somebody went and got her. And, I think she's 17 and realized that she went too far. And then I feel like it was the other girl that she went up there with. I'm pretty sure it was her mom that went and got him back.
Okay.
And got them both back.
So you think these times that the way we could generalize this is that she was running away, but she always intended to come back. This wasn't run away for good type of thing. And she just got caught.
Just running her own show, and she could, and so she did.
Okay.
I mean.
Okay. I think that what I'm trying to do is that, the listener, of course, you knew your sister. I didn't. The listeners don't. I think it's interesting to maybe, explain this a little bit just for everybody to understand that when she disappeared, this was not the first time that she had disappeared, at least for a few days. She had gone off on her own.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wish I could really say that I knew her.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? At this point, I mean, I guess I could almost more say like I know of her.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know more of her than I did know her.
Okay.
I
understand. But we just need to set up the fact that the time she just went missing, where she didn't come back in 1998, was not the first time she disappeared, at least for a few days. And so she had some experience doing this, planning it out, thinking about it, maybe even getting a friend involved, etc.
And I can say that as a young girl, for years and years, I was sure she was going to come back. So she didn't take off that much to where I had an opinion in my mind, and it might have just been a protecting thing of what I did to protect myself from the truth. But in my mind, until high school, so from 12 to 15, I thought she was just going to come back one day. And it wasn't really until I turned 17 myself that I really realized, because at 11, I look at her and she looked like a grown-up to me. She was like an adult as far as I was concerned. And she could come back whenever she wanted. And then once I was actually 17 is when it really hit me, is that she was actually just a little girl.
That's interesting.
But from my eyes, I thought that for years.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting you put it that 11, 17-year-old does seem like an adult. And then when you get to be 17, and you're thinking, she's an adult, she can, she's going to come back anytime. Then when you get to be 17, it's like, well, you know what? I'm not as much as adult as I thought I was going to be. And then that's when you started looking at you at 17, started looking back at the disappearance a little bit differently.
And that's where I think that the survivor's guilt on my part, of where I really started to self-destruct in my life. They say that there's the survivor's guilt.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that I definitely think that I definitely have some of that.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. I think that's the first time we've talked about it in those terms on this program. It's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Marjorie, as you already said, she had the recollection that Juanita was into drugs, but you at 11, don't remember that. But it seems like she was into something if she had to take P-tests at this school that she was going to. She was into something.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it at that. So she had a lot of things going on. She was molested as a little girl, and we know. I mean, it's well documented. You don't need to be a psychiatrist to know that these molestations do affect both boys and girls in very negative ways. That they do all sorts of things. Maybe that kids that have not been molested would do. Maybe that culminated in her wanting to run away and some of these other things, drugs. We know that those things can happen to kids who have been abused.
Yes.
So there's that. I think we also need to understand this. If we could just talk about this very shortly. Your parents. Of course, they're both still alive. Of course, you just talked about your mother, and I know your father's still alive. How did they handle all this back at the time, the way you look back at it?
I did speak with my mom about this at length the last night, and the first thing I want to say is I had a very wonderful mother, and in a lot of ways I had a really beautiful childhood, and my mom really did, she definitely did her best. And, I feel like in a lot of ways my dad did too. It was 5 kids. We always had new school clothes. We always had so many presents under the Christmas tree, people would come over, and I mean, there was 5 kids. So of course there's a lot of presents, but I mean, we had a lot, we were living in a 1-bedroom house with 5 kids. And the way the house was, it was, we had at one point my parents had taken out a bathroom because there was 2 bathrooms, and put a room in there for Marge, and then there was a back room, and then there was a room in between the kitchen and the living room, and then there was a little room off the kitchen. So it was technically a 1-bedroom house, but it was a very large 1-bedroom house. And the way my mom had it set up, it was so nice, it was, we always had we always would get, electric blankets for Christmas, and, and our beds were always made perfect when we got home. My mom, for what we had a huge yard, and my parents had dug a hole in the backyard and built a deck around it, put a liner in it, and put a pool in there. And all the kids in the neighborhood were always at our house. And we had this big play structure in the backyard, and, a big trampoline, and, for what we had, my mom and my mom really tried to make it special for us.
Yeah. And we already know, you already spoke about her, and that she was able to track these people down in Kansas, I guess it was, regarding Michael Biggs. So she must be very industrious. She must be intelligent too.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to this. So this is what the general feeling of the Nelson household was in the mid to late 90s. And we're going to come back to some of this in a bit. We do have to talk about one other person just to set this all up, and his name is Graham Farmer. Who is he, and how did Juanita know him?
Graham was my sister's boyfriend, and I'm pretty sure they were together for about 2 years, which would have meant they started dating when my sister was 15 and he was 17. Okay. The time that she went missing, he was then 19 and she was 17.
Okay.
So,
and so he was
for being young,
please.
That's a pretty long-term relationship,
It is.
For being that age.
I agree.
I guess that's kind of a big deal.
Okay.
And she worshipped him. She really did.
So was he?
I remember that.
The way you look back at, once again, reminding the listeners you were 11. Did he come over to the house a lot? Was he welcome at your house? Did he? My understanding is that some of these times she ran away, it was the 2 of them together. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
He was welcome. He was welcome at our house. I actually remember the first time I ever met him. And he was welcome there. He was welcome there until they had gotten in trouble enough times. He sold pot, and at one point there was 2 car accidents that they had gotten into, and one they were selling like, I don't know, a pound of weed. This is reiterated to me. They were selling a pound of weed somewhere in San Jose, and the people had taken the weed and didn't pay for it. And so they had gotten in a chase, like a car chase, because Graham was trying to catch up to these people that had stole his weed, and they got into a car accident. And that's when she first got in trouble. She got in trouble because they were going down like a residential area with all these kids playing, and got into a car accident over this drug thing. And she'd ended up going to juvenile hall over it. And that's the first accident. And when they got into that car accident chasing these people that had, taken their weed, she had gotten actually a little bit of money from the insurance company, because she had gotten like whiplash and like seatbelt burn and stuff like that. And she had gotten like, I don't know, a small sum of money. But the thing about it was, that's when my mom stopped letting them hang out. But, being a 17-year-old girl or a 16-year-old girl, I mean, I had the same boyfriend in high school that my mom didn't like, but it didn't stop me from hanging out with him, So that's where the rift between, I think, my mom and my sister really kind of started, was because my mom was like, you're not hanging out with this guy. This guy's getting you into a bunch of trouble. And that's another thing that was happening between my mom and my dad, was she was getting these money settlements for these car accidents that she'd gotten in with him, because there's another one later on. This was the first one. And my mom didn't want her to get the money, because my mom thought in a way that she was being rewarded for bad behavior.
Yeah.
But my dad was like, no, she should get this money, and da-da-da-da. And my mom, that was one of the things that my mom and my dad were definitely not seeing eye to eye on,
same page.
because my mom was like, no, she shouldn't be getting this money. She's out being not, And my dad just was like, saw money and dollar signs and didn't really care how it came from. And morally, my mom is like a very moral person. And my dad is not.
Well, some people, I don't know if there's a morality to that or not. I mean, if she gets in a wreck and it's not her fault, I understand. I understand both sides of it. I can see both sides. You don't want to reward bad behavior, but on the other hand, that's why you have insurance, and saying maybe you could donate it to charity or something. So I could see, both sides of it. But regarding Graham, what was like the status of their relationship at the time that, so you had a falling out, I guess, with your mother, and we'll talk about Graham and your father's relationship here in a bit. But what was the status of their relationship at the time that Juanita disappeared? Just the status of, were they still
always on again, off again. And I think that a lot of times, I would say, I have a feeling a lot of it was Graham was like, get the hell away from me. And I think that Juanita was like, no, I won't.
Okay.
I can kind of say that I think that I kind of think that happened.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
think there was a little bit of that going on. He did beat her, and he was physical with her. And that was another thing that was really hard with my dad and my mom, is that he would beat my sister up. And there's been many people that were their friends that say that happened. My sister had talked to my mother about it. My dad has admitted it. And then my dad would pick him up and take him to work with him. And so my sister Juanita was like, I told you that this guy beat me up yesterday, and then you called him and picked him up and took him to work,
We're going to talk about that later. I'm sure the listeners are going to want to hear a little bit more about that. But we just wanted to establish who Graham is, because he's going to talk, for this day that we're going to be talking about. So we already have the car wrecks that you talked about. She was in one, and one where it was involving drugs. The other one was also involving drugs?
The other one was actually, I think, was an accident. And the other one was an accident, too. And, just to go back to what you said, about, well, it wasn't her fault. In a way, and it's, I know how my mom felt about it, in a way it was her fault, because if she wasn't out doing what she was doing, which was selling drugs, then she wouldn't have ever gotten in that car accident. So it's like, maybe it wasn't her fault, but there is some fault to be
Well, I guess what I'm saying is obviously whoever is dishing this money out is not putting the fault at the feet of Juanita.
Yeah, no.
So, I guess business-wise, ethically, I guess business-wise, ethically, they had to pay out. Okay. And how long, the second car wreck, how long was that before she went missing? Roughly.
I'm going to say it was in like August or October of that year, and she went missing in December.
Okay. So a few months before.
Yeah.
And and then the other thing that we need to maybe straighten out right now is that because I realize that in many places where her disappearance is talked about, the school that she was going to was not a school that she would walk to. This is a school that was some distance away. She had to ride the bus or get a ride or something like that.
Yes, and my mom was most of the time. My mom would drive her to school during this time because she didn't want to leave it up to her to, get there on her own. And so my mom was actually, 90% of the time my mom was driving her. But at this time, my parents had finally started. My mom had already filed for divorce, so my mom wasn't at the house as much. And it was one morning that unfortunately we'd all left really early. She would take us to school 1st. We all left really early, and it was one of the mornings that she was expected to get herself to school on her own.
Okay, so let's talk about December 14th, 1998. As you remember it, once again, this is going to contradict the published reports because you're going to read a lot of places where it says she disappeared while walking to school. Well, walking to this school was not possible. It was many miles away. So from your point of view, what do you remember about that morning? Like you said, you and Nick, I guess left for, maybe Holly too, left for school before Juanita did. Just talk about that day, that morning.
So one of the things that's really, really hard for me is the fact that I don't remember the last time I saw her.
Okay.
I didn't, as a young person, I guess I didn't know, of course, that maybe I should, hold on to that memory. But something I actually did find out from my mom last night is that Juanita actually went missing. It was the morning of the 13th of December, which is the day after my 12th birthday. So I can tell you what I know I did that day, we would, for my birthday. But I think that because it was my birthday, it was my birthday. I went to bed, went to school the next day, and it says the 14th on the record because
it does.
There was a woman at the gas station that my mother knew, and they were actually really good friends, and she told my mom that she knew for 100% positive that she saw my sister Juanita on the 14th, the morning of the 14th, hitchhiking at the bottom of Graham Hill Road, which is in Felton. And so when my mom went to put the report out, she put that day as the last day my mom knew that somebody saw her.
Okay.
And she 100% trusted this woman. This woman has since died of cancer. But she asked her, she's like, "Are you 100% positive?" And she said, "I am 100% positive that I saw Juanita." And everybody knew she hitchhiked, and she knew nobody liked it. And so that's why it says the 14th, but it was actually the morning of the 13th.
All right, so the 13th is the last day that she was at home and was supposed to be going to school. Yeah. And like you said, she would usually get a ride, but this particular morning, her mother, your mother, you're both your mother, couldn't take her. And any idea how she was supposed to get to school that day?
My mom had made her a lunch, and she had put lunch money in the bagged lunch. As far as I know.
So on December 13th, that morning, you get taken to school by your mother along with Nick. What about Holly? Does she get taken to school as well?
Holly as well. Nick and I would get dropped off in Boulder Creek, and then Holly was in high school at the time, so she would get dropped off across the street at the high school across the street from my grandparents where my mother worked.
Okay.
So my mom would drop us off, drop Holly off, and then she went straight to work at my grandparents.
And what was the reason that on this particular day that she didn't take Juanita to school? That seems like a pretty average, every family gets into a rhythm about kids going to school and pick them up this time. What was the main deal that she couldn't take Juanita to school this morning?
When I asked her about it, she said that it's because her and my dad at that point were really, really bad, and she was, working as much as she could so that she could get out of the house because they had filed for divorce, and my mom was trying to get out of there. And, I didn't press my mom really hard on it because it's something that my mom,
Tough.
I know that she wished she took her that day.
Right.
So it's like she gave me that much detail, and I didn't press for more.
Okay, so the listeners can understand. So Juanita went missing on a day where things kind of got out of the regular pattern.
Yeah.
This was an exception. This particular day, December 13th, 1998, was an exception to the rule of how things usually went the morning at the Nelson house.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And when you guys left, who would have been? Was Juanita home by herself? Was your father there? Was anybody else there?
Yes. And, my mom believes that my dad was gone when she left in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
But she said she wasn't totally sure. She couldn't really remember. She just knew that we got out of the house kind of early that day.
Okay. So the expectation was that Juanita would have to take the bus, which she didn't normally do, or, maybe hitchhike, which sounds like a horrible idea, because the school I have in my notes is 18 miles away. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
But she had to do it because she would have to,
Right.
she would have to check in with probation.
Right.
And if she didn't go to school, so it's like,
Okay. Okay, so she the expectation, she has to get herself to school. You're leaving already, and 18 miles away is not close, especially if it's to take the bus. That might be a 40-minute trip or something. So she would have to leave probably right away to get there on time. But you did say about that morning is that Juanita talked to your grandmother that morning. What do you know about that?
I didn't know about that until about a month ago when I talked to my grandma. My grandma didn't tell my mom that until years later, too.
Wow.
She had called my grandmother, and she was mad. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why my grandma didn't say anything about it. My grandma was like the last person to talk to her, and it was the last time my grandma would have ever talked to her, and she was upset because she thought my brother had taken her backpack. We don't really necessarily know if Nick's the one that took it, but all of the stuff that was in her backpack was dumped out, and her backpack was gone. And she had called my grandma, and she was mad at my brother because she thought that my brother took her backpack, and my grandma told her to go anyway. And it's one of those things that when I even think about it, it makes me want to cry because I don't ever want my brother to know that, because I don't want him to know that before she died, that she was mad at him for any reason, and something that I didn't know that. And I think that's one of the reasons why my grandma never told anybody.
Well, let me ask you this. Was the backpack ever found?
I don't know. I don't know how they think Nick did it, and and I don't know if he even actually did. And
does that sound fun? Let's put it this way. Does that sound like something your brother would do?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe he did, but it would seem to me that he would bring it home then later that day, or he would continue to use it, and wouldn't somebody like your mother or maybe even Holly, being that she was a little older, recognize why you using Juanita's backpack? I guess nothing like that ever happened.
I think that this has happened a good amount of times that she had taken off, that nobody was, putting exhibit A or B or C around anything or wondering where the backpack went, or my grandma didn't tell my mom about it because nobody was thinking that she was, like
I guess what
gone
I'm
forever
saying
at
is
this
if
point,
Nick
you
took
know?
the, I know, but I guess what I'm saying is that if Nick took the backpack and he's getting a ride to school with your mother, then maybe she would have recognized, hey Nick, where'd you get that backpack? That looks like Juanita's.
If she did, she didn't say anything about it, and
Okay.
she didn't, you know. So no,
Okay.
I guess no.
Okay. So the backpack story is something that has never been resolved 20 years later.
No, it hasn't, and it's something that I'm hesitant to even ask my brother about.
Okay.
You know,
Okay. Well,
because it makes me want to cry. So
well,
you know,
we do a lot of crying on Unfound. All right. So I don't want you to feel bad about that, but I think that it's probably time. I'm going to just say this publicly. It's probably time to have a conversation. Because if he says, no, I would never do that, then it could be that this backpack is an element of the disappearance. And I don't know what that means, but it wouldn't be nice to get this little bit of a mystery out of the way. Just saying. Okay? And you're all in your 30s now. It's probably time. Just thinking. Okay? So
yeah.
all right. So and once again, you can't do this. You didn't even know about this till recently, so you can't do anything about it if you don't know about it. All right. So
Yeah.
everybody goes off to school. You take for granted that Juanita is going to go to her school 18 miles away. Not sure if your father was home or not at the time, being that your mother and he were on the outs, and she was going to be getting divorced. When does somebody figure out that Juanita is missing? And once again, we have to keep in mind she was known to leave and run away for days. But what have you learned about those later that day into the next few days after December 13th?
I talked about this with my mother a lot last night, and she told me that it was after she had talked to Hazel. It was like 3 days, and she went down to the police station and filed a missing persons report. And she said that she could tell by the way that the cop that took the report from her was kind of looking at her, that they weren't taking it very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know what it was, but my mom was freaking out, and she had a really, really bad feeling. And because of how the district attorney handled my sister with the Michael Biggs case, and like, you know,
Yeah.
my mom at that point wasn't like waiting for anybody to help her out. My mom, within a week, had printed up hundreds of missing posters and posted them all over town. She gave some to my Aunt Laura that was up in the Reading area, that posted them all over there. And her boyfriend Mark, whose mother lived in Alabama, she had missing posters sent all the way to Alabama. She had missing posters sent to Nevada through my uncle. And she posted them everywhere with her phone number on it. And she asked my dad to put some up, and my dad put one at the dump because he was going there, and my dad didn't put any up anywhere. That's what I can tell you that I know about that.
Okay, so
my mom freaked out.
Okay, so December 13th, she disappears. Juanita disappears. The woman allegedly, and then the listeners know, you may not know, Katie, but listeners know how I feel about eyewitness accounts. I don't generally believe them. So she ended up putting all these flyers up days later. But that day, December 13th, maybe even December 14th, when she got home that day, or maybe Nick and Holly got home, maybe you get home, were any of those things that your mother had given to your sister Juanita still there? Like the money, you mentioned the money. Was it still there in the house?
As far as I know, it was in the lunch. It was in her lunch bag that my mom had made the lunch for her, and it was still there, yeah. The only thing that my mom said that she knew that was left behind that sent a red flag to her was that Juanita's wallet was there.
Huh. And that is something I'm guessing that everybody would take anywhere they're going, not just Juanita, but any 17-year-old or 40-year-old or anybody.
It had all of her phone numbers in it, and by that time there was no cell phones then where you had all your phone numbers stored. It had all of her numbers in it.
Yeah.
And it was something that she took with her all the time.
And as you understand it, once again, being 11 at the time, but now maybe understanding more about what was going on with Juanita running away, is this a wallet that she would usually take with her when she ran away? Like, for example, when she was found in Idaho, was the wallet with her?
According to my mom, yeah, because it was one of the things that really, really freaked my mom out. It
Okay.
wasn't. She didn't take with her.
All right.
It was
So.
one of the warning signs for my mom.
All right. So if we're to believe that Juanita left on her own that day, she left without food, she left without this money that was given to her, and she was left without this wallet that had all these phone numbers on it. Sounds a little strange to me. Okay. So that was, like you said, something that really raised a red flag for your mother. And as you've already said, your father seems a little nonplussed about this. Seems like he, I don't know him, but he didn't seem to be that much bothered by Juanita being missing. How would you portray it?
My opinion is this. My mom and my dad, my mom had filed for divorce. My mom was leaving him, and he kind of used, I feel like he used Juanita against my mom to piss her off, because he kind of tried to tell my mom, like, well, I know where she is, and was trying to make my mom feel like Juanita just didn't want her to know where she is. But I think that it was because my dad was mad that my mom was leaving him.
Mm-hmm.
And so he knew that would hurt her, and he was using it to hurt her. And then when Juanita ended up going missing, I think that he had kind of dug himself a hole.
Yeah.
And that's actually why the cops started looking into him as a suspect.
All right.
I think that it was out of an intention to hurt my mom, and that's what I want to believe. More than it was.
Okay. And are you thinking that's the reason he only put one flyer up? And she put thousands up. He only put one up because he thought that Juanita was going to come back?
I want to believe so, yes.
Okay. Well, I don't know what to believe. I'm just saying that could be a reason that he did that, because he might have thought, well, we're just going through the motions. She's going to be coming back in a couple of days anyway.
That's exactly what I want to believe.
Okay. All right. So we've established that she could not have been walking to school. And in fact, she didn't take some of the things with her that she would have taken to school if she were going to school. In fact, just an opinion on this, being that the wallet was there, the money was there, the food was there, those I think are things that anybody would take if they were running away, not just Juanita. So you could almost believe that maybe she vanished from the house, possibly. And I'm sure the listeners are thinking that right at the second. In those few days between her going missing and, let's say, your mother going down to the police station, let's say the December 16th, 17th, did Graham come around? Did he come around looking for her? Did your mother say? Have any memories of that?
I spoke to my father, and according to him, they were actually still working together. My dad did tree work, so he would pick Graham up a lot. And yeah, they were still working together. My mom had finally moved out of the house. Maybe it was like a month, or maybe 2 months after my sister went missing, she had actually moved out of the house. And my dad was like not letting her go over there to get a lot of her stuff. So one day she snuck over there. It was maybe like 2 months after Juanita went missing. She snuck over there to get some of her stuff. And Graham was sitting there on the couch. So yes, my dad and Graham were together a good amount after my sister went missing.
Okay. In those few days after Juanita went missing, if your mother was looking for, of course, Juanita, did she try to contact Graham to find out if he'd seen her?
I don't know. No,
okay.
Not that I know of.
And it doesn't sound like he came looking for Juanita either.
No.
Okay. All right. As your mother, as people, continued to look into this, Juanita was never verified to have gotten on the bus that day?
No.
All right. And in your neighborhood where this happened, you have like houses like right next to each other. Did any neighbors, to your knowledge, come over and say, yeah, I saw Juanita leave the house, or we saw a car pull up, anything like that?
No.
Okay. All right. And so the police weren't, as you said, the police weren't very interested in filling out the report that your mother wanted filled out. Do you think this was because of the prior history with Juanita?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that some point after Juanita disappeared, maybe weeks later, your mother snuck over to the house. She was, I guess, living on her own, and Graham was over at your house, the very house where Juanita disappeared from.
Yes.
Wow.
And in the cops' defense, I will say that there are girls that go missing, and when their parents file a police report, they hop to it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Nina definitely kind of dug herself a hole, and maybe my mom as well, in where this had happened so many times that they didn't hop to it.
Yeah.
You know,
okay.
If that makes any sense.
Okay.
You know.
All right. Did you has your mother ever talked to Graham about Juanita's disappearance? Not just then, but any time since 1998.
A couple months after she went missing, my mom saw him in town in Boulder Creek, and she pulled over, and she said that he leaned in the door of the passenger door of her car, and she explained it to me like she said, if the devil had a look on his face of like the devil being inside somebody, that's how Graham looked at her, and he said, you know, do you know where Juanita is, to my mom, and basically said, well, don't you want to know what happened to her? And she said that the look on his face was really evil. And that's, so yes, I know that there was some encounters between them. But I think he was probably avoiding her as much as he could. So that's the only one that I know of that happened shortly after she disappeared.
Okay. And we're going to talk about Graham. He has a little bit of a history since 1998 on his own. He got in some trouble. Okay, let's move on to this. So I also have written in my notes here that the police really didn't do anything for 18 months. Didn't do anything.
They really started looking into it after Graham was arrested for tying up the girlfriend that he had a year and a half later, and holding her hostage for 4 days with a gun to her head, and he tied her up with a telephone cord, and he raped her and sodomized her, and had his friends come in and do the same thing, and he held his girlfriend captive for 4 days. And when they went and found her, because she escaped through a window or something, and they found her, and they went to search the house to arrest him, they found her journal. And in her journal, it said, I'm scared that what happened to Juanita is what's going to happen to me. And after they read that and what he had done to his girlfriend year and a half later, that's when they started looking for my sister.
Wow. All right. So I guess we're going to talk about Graham right now, and that's fine by me.
Sorry.
That's all right.
But that's when they started to actually look, was after they read that in her diary.
Okay, we're not going to, let's just use her first name. I'm not going to say her full name, but just for the ease of this conversation, what was this girl's first name?
Do we want to do that?
We can say the first name, sure.
Okay. Kelly.
Kelly. All right, that's a common name. Okay.
Yeah.
So Kelly and Graham were an item, and somehow he started going out with her after Juanita disappeared. Maybe he was going out with her. It seems like you said that Juanita was kind of chasing after Graham. And then at some point he decided to do some very horrible things to her that you've already described. Any reason why this happened now that, of course, it's many, many years later? Why did this all happen? Do you know?
Graham was using a lot of drugs. And this is something that he'll admit. He was doing a lot of drugs, and he'd been up for days, as far as the report stated.
Mm-hmm.
And
so Graham was into a lot of drugs.
Yes. And from what I know, he had been up for a couple days, and started to go crazy, and did this to his girlfriend.
Okay. And she escaped, and there was a trial, and he was found guilty of all sorts of doing different things against her. But in this diary, is Kelly saying that Graham mentioned Juanita while he had her tied up, while he had Kelly tied up?
Either before then, I don't know when she wrote this in the diary, and I don't know if there was other things in the diary that the cops didn't tell us, because those are things that, they don't want to release everything. So, I don't exactly know what was in the diary, but that's what the cops told us.
That's the cops said.
In the diary, it said that she was scared that what happened to Juanita was going to happen to her, and that's when they started looking into Graham as a suspect.
Okay.
Because of what he had done to her and what they had read in her diary.
Have you ever personally talked to Kelly?
No.
Okay. I'd be interested to know. The reason I'm asking is I'd be interested to know if she knew that Graham and Juanita, did she even know about Juanita going missing before she and Graham got together? That's what would be interesting to me.
Yes. She lived in Boulder Creek. There's missing posters all over town about my sister, and Graham and Juanita have been together long enough that I feel like it'd be pretty hard not to know.
Okay. So she decided to be with him despite knowing that, and then it seemed he had some behavior that I guess could be construed, if it went long enough, could make a woman disappear. I mean, Graham's the one that went to jail.
He also beat my sister, so it's not necessarily behavior that I know he's not capable of. What he did to her. I mean, he did the same thing to my sister. So he, had a habit of getting physical with women. And in Kelly's circumstance, he took it a little further, and that is documented, and he was convicted and sent to prison for 4 years for what happened to her.
Okay. So he goes to jail, and that's when the police get interested in, hey, maybe it is a possibility that he did something to Juanita. Have the police ever told you that if Graham has an alibi for the day that Juanita disappeared, did he ever take a polygraph test, anything like that? Was there any proof that he was ever over at your house that December 13th, anything like that?
No.
No,
there isn't.
Okay. Now, you did tell me this, though, you did tell me shortly after, though, Juanita disappeared, that Graham took off and he went to Idaho. Is that true?
Yes. I don't know what the connection is there, or if they both knew somebody that lived up there, or what there is about Idaho. I don't know. But yes, that's where the cops actually went and picked him up, because he did all this stuff to Kelly. Kelly had escaped, and he fled to Idaho. And the cops had to go to Idaho to arrest him for what he did to her.
Wow. Okay, and he already had a lawyer at that time.
Yes, and I think one of the major reasons why the cops went up there to get him is because of what they read in her diary. Because they realized, okay, this maybe isn't just a case of a domestic, rape thing. After they read what was read in the diary, they're like, this is actually a possible murder suspect. So they went all the way up to Idaho and picked him up.
Yeah.
And that's when they really started looking into Graham.
Okay. But once again, this would already be maybe 2 years down the road. It doesn't sound like a long time, but it is. It is. If you don't investigate it right away, then even 2 years later, it can be a pain to try to put everything back together. People forget things, and they get the dates wrong. That's going to be a little tough.
And any physical evidence.
Yeah.
Any physical evidence at that point is
right. That's right. Do you know if Graham's pled guilty to doing this to her, or was there actually a trial where a jury or a judge found him guilty? Do you remember?
He had gotten a hold of Kelly at some point, and Kelly didn't want to press charges. And the cops the DA pressed charges against him without her testifying, which is the evidence that they had first gotten from the first interview with her. And they actually went out of their way to convict him without her.
Oh, okay.
Without her testimony.
Okay. And so...
And it worked.
Yeah.
He went to prison for it for a good chunk of time.
All right.
You know?
4 years, did you say?
4 years. And actually, I ended up talking to Graham's mother about it years later. And, you know, she's like, Graham wouldn't have gotten into any trouble if it wasn't for, this is Graham's mother told me this.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for them thinking that he did what he did to Juanita, that they couldn't have got him on what they got him on with Kelly. You know? And she said that the cops really convicted him for that because they couldn't convict him for Juanita. You know, in a roundabout way, but that's
okay. Well,
the cops
there's a lot of mothers running interference for their criminal kids out there, so that doesn't surprise me at all. Okay. Yeah. Now, while he was in jail, though, if we are to believe this, and I of course want to find out how you even heard about this, but he had a cellmate, and what did he tell the cellmate?
When he was in prison for that, what he did to Kelly, he had told a cellmate in San Quentin that he had came to my house that morning and saw an interaction between my sister and my father. And my sister was in the shower, and I don't exactly know what the interaction was, but that my sister had run out to his car after him. And he told his cellmate that he'd been up for a couple days on meth, and that my sister got into his car and they started driving down the road, and, you know, she was like up in his face, and he was like, just leave me alone. And at one point he stabbed her. She was in the passenger seat, and he stabbed her. And he kept telling my sister, this is what he told the cellmate, he kept telling my sister, we're going to get to the fire station, we're going to get you some help, everything's going to be okay. And my sister kept hitting him and kept attacking him, and then he stabbed her again, and then she kept hitting him, and then he stabbed her again. And then by the time he got to the fire station in town, he'd already stabbed her so many times that he couldn't take her into the fire station. He panicked, and he pushed her on the floorboard of the car where she bled to death, and he drove her up the mountain.
Okay, and what is he? And I'm going to ask you a lot of questions after this, but what does he say then? He took her up to the mountains, and so
I don't really know what happened after that. I just know that he drove her up the mountain to Deer Creek Road, and that's where the cops have dug for my sister multiple times in different locations up there looking for her body. So what they know that they haven't told us, that leads them to believe that that's where they should be digging. That's a piece that the cops haven't told us.
Okay. But did you not tell me that he drove up there and there were some meth heads up there that helped him with this?
Well, it's more like what the cops have told us they believe. So at that point, there was a man up there that was digging in the roads, and he had a tractor and a lot of heavy equipment, and that they were up there cooking meth, and that's where Graham had brought her, and they believe that those people had the kind of heavy equipment up there to then dispose of her body.
Okay.
So, but that's what the cops have gathered and what they've shared with us. But why they feel that way, what they've heard that tells them that, I don't know.
Okay. Has this car that allegedly has Graham's car ever been found? Ever any forensics done on it, to your knowledge?
The cops did tell us when they came and told us that whole story about the confession. They said that Graham's mother was never cooperative ever in any sense of the investigation. But at one point they had gone to her house and they had asked if they could search the vehicle. And they said the only time that she was ever cooperative was when she said, yeah, sure, you can search the vehicles. But the cops told us it's because she knew that the car that this had happened in had been impounded. And the cops said that was the only time she ever cooperated with them, was when she said yes, that they could search the vehicles. But they later found out that the reason why she was okay with it, the only thing she was ever okay with, was because she knew that car was gone. So no, they found no physical evidence.
Well, did they ever find the car that Juanita was allegedly stabbed in?
No, because they had said at that point it had already been impounded.
Okay,
it was a maroon, like, kind of Cadillac thing.
Okay, so the car was impounded, and the police were looking for a car that they had in their own impound lot?
No, I don't know. These are, once again, just the story that the cops gave us about why they never found any physical evidence or the vehicle, was because it had already been impounded at some point, probably in the year and a half between when they started looking and they weren't looking, is when that car got taken somewhere.
Okay. So you have no idea what happened to that car. The police have never told you, because if somebody gets stabbed in a car, there's no way that's going to be able to be cleaned up. That's going to be like that car in Pulp Fiction where the guy gets shot in the head. It's going to be so to the point that there's no amount of cleaning that's going to be able to fix it. But that car's never been found.
The cops told us that it was impounded, and that's why it was never found. So that they told us that that's why it wasn't found.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, Katie. Does that story make any sense to you, that the police couldn't find the car because it was in their own impound lot?
You know, they didn't give a lot of details as to why they know that the car was impounded, but I can only assume that since they could look up records on whatever vehicle was registered under his name around the time Nina went missing, that they found out that that car at some point was then demolished in a wrecking yard or impounded at another date, and they were too late. It had already, the one that was registered in his name wasn't there anymore. So the car was gone.
Okay. We also have to remember, though, that nobody ever claimed they saw Graham over at your house that day. No cars pulled into the driveway. And we also have to remember that why would Juanita get into the car if she, without her money, without her food, without her wallet? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but okay. I'm just reminding the listeners. So there's no proof that Graham drove over there. Nobody saw him. And it would make sense that if she was going somewhere, that your sister probably, not 100%, but probably would take those things that were left behind. Probably. Not 100%, but probably.
Her wallet.
Her wallet.
One thing that I would think she would have taken with her.
Okay. But there are certainly a lot of scenarios that we can imagine, but it just seemed weird that if he's going to tell this story that he went over, that those things are still there. Maybe some people have a different opinion. You did bring this up. Is there any proof that if Graham is going to tell this story is because Juanita was pregnant with his child? Did that come up at some point?
Juanita had told people that she was pregnant and that it was Graham's. Her friends, one of the friends that worked in the gas station, she had told her that she was pregnant. And that's the only proof that we have that she was pregnant, is that she had told some people that she was pregnant and that it was Graham's.
Okay.
But no, there was no pregnancy test that my mom saw her take. No, she did not tell my mother that she was pregnant. My dad claims that she did tell him that she was pregnant.
And I guess nobody knows about her going to see a doctor at any time?
No.
During any of this. Okay. So we're not sure what to make of that, but that is a story that is popped up, and she wouldn't be the first, not just young girl, but woman who accidentally got pregnant, and the guy doesn't want to be a father, and something happens to the woman. That's very common. So we have to think about that. Let's go back to those, what the police said about the meth heads. These meth heads actually popped up later in some sort of trouble that they got into. Did they actually mention Juanita once they were charged with their crimes?
Once again, after the confession in prison and after what had happened to Kelly, the cops started looking into that area. And at one point when they were up there checking it out, they had stumbled across, I don't know, should I say names here?
I would not. You don't have to mention any names, but
well, two of the people that were, that the cops thought might have had something to do with the disposing of her body.
Mm-hmm.
When they were up there looking around, they ended up finding a meth lab.
Okay.
And they were going to convict him for it. And I don't know, this is another thing that the cops just told us.
You can only go by what they tell. I know you don't know it you would not know these things firsthand, but we have to take for granted that things that the cops would tell you would be the truth. So you just tell the people, you just tell the listeners what the cops told you.
Well, they were up there, they found this meth lab, and they were going to convict him for it because basically they were squeezing all these people in any way they could, getting them on anything that they could because they were trying to figure out what happened to Juanita. And when they were trying to convict him for the meth lab, they had at one point said that if they would drop the charges for the meth lab, they would give up the location of the body. And
wow.
the attorney that was representing them, it was a couple, the attorney that was representing them actually happened to be the same attorney that represented Michael Biggs in my sister's molestation case.
That's crazy.
At this point, he's not a district attorney. He's not a public defender like he was with the Michael Biggs case. Now he is a big wig defense attorney. And they had hired him to get him off on this manufacturing methamphetamine charge.
Mm-hmm.
And they had gone into chambers and they were going to discuss giving up the body in exchange for, losing all of these manufacturing charges. And then when they came out of chambers, they said no deal. And they never gave up the location of the body. Once again, these were things that the police came and told us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the cops want us to believe. I don't,
okay.
Well,
unless you have some reason not to believe them, then that's all you got. We can only talk about what we've been told. I wasn't there. Of course, you were 11 years old at the time she disappeared, but you'd like to, trust that the cops, although they may not tell you everything, that when they do talk to your family, that they tell you the truth, even if it's not a lot of truth.
Well, I do think this. I think that the cops ended up finding out that they know that they fucked up too. And I think in a way they were trying to cover their own ass as well. Am I allowed to say that on here?
Sure.
And because they did. They didn't look for her when they should have. And so I think that they had a lot of making up to do too. And so I think that there might be some instances in my sister's case where there's things that they're not going to release about what they did as well.
Okay.
Because I think that they have some things to hide as well because they did. They dropped the ball when it came to my sister.
Okay. But do you think, is it your opinion that, do you believe this? What do you make of it? We've talked about this already. That's why I have it in my notes. But these meth heads were going to expose where Juanita's body was, and then they go into chambers, and then they decide not to. Is that a mistake, or do you think they were lying? How do you interpret that?
I think that from what the cops had told me is that the district attorney told them, or their attorney, the same one that had represented the person that molested my sister, 10 years before, had told him not to do it. He said don't do it because I'm going to get you off on this. And they did get off on it, and they got off on it because the lab hadn't been used yet. So they did go to jail, but they went to jail for no time at all because they ended up getting charged with intent to manufacture methamphetamine because they hadn't started, I don't really know how to cook meth or whatever, but they hadn't started cooking that batch yet. So there wasn't any proof that they were actually cooking the meth. it was proof that they were going to cook the meth, or that they had intended on cooking meth in this meth lab, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they ended up getting charged with, which was like not that big of a deal, I guess. I don't know what kind of like sentence that holds versus actually getting convicted of manufacturing meth. But I guess when they weighed it out, they decided to take that charge and then not even bring up the body thing. And the attorney actually did get him off on it. He got him a lesser charge on that.
All right, listeners are going to have to judge that for themselves, and I'm probably going to talk about that a little bit in my summation at the end. All right, so we've talked quite a bit about Graham Farmer. Now, probably the most startling thing about Graham Farmer is that after he went to jail, it seems like he has cleaned his life up. Just what's he doing now?
You know, he ended up working his way all the way up to, he ended up going to Berkeley, I believe, or Cal State. He went to community college, and then he went to Cal State. He went into treatment and like NA, and he met a girl there, and they had a family, and now he lives somewhere in Louisiana.
So if we are to believe this, that after his stint in jail for that time for doing what he did to Kelly, in which he was found guilty for those things, he went to a good school. I know people know Berkeley for a lot of different reasons, but it's a good school. And graduated and moved out to a different state, got married, and I think he even has a couple children now.
Yeah.
Not usually, I can tell you from my experience, not the usual life path that people take when, they've been in jail for 4 years for beating up a woman and being in drugs and everything. He's certainly taken a better path than most of the other people I've heard about on Unfound.
And definitely he's more successful than any other name of anybody that I know that was involved, or anybody that was said to have been involved in my sister's case, or in her disappearance.
Yeah.
He's definitely by far surpassed all of them in success. I guess that would be in living a successful life.
All right. So the listeners are going to have to take that into account as well. But once again, no proof he was ever over at your house that day. Nobody saw his car. Nobody saw him and everything. But he did allegedly say these things in jail. And so we need to go here next. We need to talk about your father, because in that story that you had already told about 10 minutes ago, that allegedly he told his cellmate that he did go over to your house. Of course, you weren't there, but Juanita was there. And your father was there, and he said he saw your father doing something to Juanita. Has your father ever said that he saw Graham over at your house that morning? Has he ever said that?
No.
Okay.
And the last time I talked to him, he said he did not say anything about that.
Does he know? Well, does your father know that Graham said that?
Yes, because the cops actually were looking into my father as a suspect, and they went up to my father's property in Oregon and dug up my father's backyard looking for my sister's body. They also looked for my sister's body at our old house, the house that she went missing at. They checked out that property and didn't find her. And they did look into my father for some time, because my father had done some weird things with the money, with the insurance money that she had gotten. The first settlement she got, she had some money in the Chase Bank in Scotts Valley, and on my dad's way out of town, he lived in Santa Cruz for maybe about a year after my sister went missing. And on his way out of town, he moved up to my grandmother's house in Oregon. And on his way out of town, he actually cleared out one of my sister's bank accounts and went up to Oregon, right? And this was right around the time that the cops actually finally started to see what happened to my sister, and they noticed that he did that. And because of that, they went up to Oregon and they dug up my father's backyard, and he was actually a suspect because why did you go take her money unless you knew she wasn't coming back to get it?
Mhm.
Also, she was expecting a settlement from the last accident that her and Graham had gotten into. She had really actually kind of hurt her back, and so this settlement was going to be like more than the last one. I do not have a number amount. I know it was in the thousands. And the insurance company had called the house, and my dad, this is after my sister went missing, my dad told the person from the insurance company that she's there, but she's just not there right now. And when she gets back, they can call back and she'll be there. The insurance company then called my grandmother's house and talked to my mom and said that we just talked to Eric. And, he said that, Nina wasn't there right now, but that she would be there. And my mom said no. My mom said she is missing. And unless you talk to my sister in person, you do not give him anything because she is gone. And that was another red flag for the cops because he was telling people from the insurance company that she was alive when he knew very well that she had been missing for a while. Meaning I can't tell you exactly how long, maybe a month, maybe it was 2 months after she'd gone missing. I don't have that. I mean, maybe it was a week. I'm not exactly sure. But I knew that my dad, said that. And those were reasons why, the cops looked into my father. And that's also why, I did actually talk to a detective when I was preparing for this podcast. And he did, I talked to him about what you and I had talked about, Edward. And he's like, well, I don't know why he knows anything about your dad because we haven't released any of that publicly.
Okay.
So I know that the cops publicly feel safe releasing Graham's name because you've read it. But they obviously didn't feel, like they didn't feel like they had to do that to my dad.
Okay.
So.
All right, so they were looking. So they looked into you. If they're going the whole way to Oregon, and we have to remember this happened in California, they're going to the whole way to Oregon to dig up a yard where he's living now. That sounds pretty serious to me.
Yeah, they did look into him.
All right, so to your knowledge, they never went to Graham's house and dug up at his yard, did they? To your knowledge?
Yes, they did.
They did?
Yes, they did.
All right,
They did, actually. It was about 5 years ago. They went to Graham Farmer's mother's house where he was living at the time, and they used the sonar penetration stuff because they were building in the bottom story, like putting a little studio in like their basement. And so they did like the probe, magnetic stuff all through there and with dogs. And they also went the surrounding, his mother's house is like the last house on the street. So there's also a lot of like yard or a lot of like property around the house. They did that with cadaver dogs and that with the little sonar machines. And he said that they were very thorough. So she was not at Graham's.
Okay, so I guess one turn deserves another then. If they're going to check out your father and go there, I didn't know that. The listeners should know that I did not know that they dug up. I guess that never came up, that they did go over to where Graham had been living, at least at the time, even though you said this was years later. He would have been in jail probably at the time. They went and checked his mother's
property. This was only about 5 years ago.
5 years ago?
5 years ago. And actually, it was the same time they did it about 5 years ago. And about 5 years ago as well, they sent 2 detectives out to Louisiana to speak to Graham again.
Okay. 5 years ago, so 2013, 2014. Okay.
And I mean, the cops feel strongly enough about him. I can say that even, like 15 years later, they still paid to have 2 detectives fly out to Louisiana to interview him again.
That's more than they do than in most cases that are 15 years old. I have experience with that, so I agree. Where does your father say he was on the morning that Juanita disappeared, December 13th, 1998?
He said that he was actually working not far from my house. He said he was working in Forest Pools, which is basically like 2 blocks from my house. He was doing a tree job out there. And I asked him if Graham was working with him that morning, and he said no.
Okay. let's talk about maybe that relationship between him and Graham. It does sound a little weird. Did he know Graham before he started being interested in Juanita, or was this something that happened after? You're not the way you understand it.
No, I don't think. I think that my dad met Graham through my sister.
Okay.
And he had kind of started to come over to the house because they were dating, and then he's like, "Hey, if you want to work and make some money, you can work with me." And then that's how their relationship started. He did tell me that Graham and him actually did work together for maybe the next 6 months after my sister went missing, and that Graham just told him, because he's like, "Yeah, have you heard from Juanita? Have you heard from Juanita?" And, Graham kept telling him that she was in Capitola, which is maybe, another 25 miles from my house down in Santa Cruz. And we lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is where Boulder Creek is.
Mm-hmm.
So Graham had just kept telling my dad, yeah, I heard she was here, or I heard she was there. But not that he had seen her, that he knew. And, my dad did ask about her. And that's what my dad told me.
So we have a situation. If this is, so I can wrap this up, it's going to be, it's hard to believe, but so we have Graham, who is obviously, anytime there's a boyfriend involved, he's going to be a suspect. It's just the way it is. We don't know what Graham did, if he did anything. All we know is he got convicted later of doing something to another woman, but she didn't disappear. He didn't murder her. He abused her, which is horrible. But she's still around, she's living and, right now.
Yes, she is.
But your father continues to work with Graham, even though Juanita's gone. I can see maybe your father's going to think maybe she's come back 3 or 4 days because of her prior experience. But after a week or a month, red flags are surely going up in your father's head. But Graham's telling him, you're saying that Graham's telling him, oh, yeah, don't worry about her. She's in some other town.
Or I heard she was here, or I heard she was there. And my mom told me, the thing that it's hard, my mom didn't tell me a lot of this for a long time because I was young, but, she did tell me that my dad didn't really have anything to do with wanting to put up missing posters or... but like I said earlier, I think that it was his way of telling, his way of just to mess with my mom, about well, I know where she is, just to hurt my mom, and maybe so she was acting like he didn't care to her because, oh, I know where she is.
Well, so I don't need to where I was going to go with this is that then we also have to combine the two of them continuing to work together for 6 more months, along with the story that Graham allegedly told in prison about how he saw your father and Juanita, and let's just say it was something sexual, that he saw happen, and then he claims that he stabbed Juanita, and then he continued to work with your father even after this.
Yes, and that's what he said. What was happening between my dad and my sister, I never saw anything like that. My dad has never made me feel uncomfortable. My dad has never made my sister Margie feel uncomfortable. He never made, as far as I've talked to my sister Holly about it. So our personal experiences with our father, he has never touched me in any way inappropriately, or made me feel any way threatened in any way. But that's
right.
So, I mean,
but on the other hand,
for any of us to believe that, but it is my dad, so of course I don't want to believe it.
Of course,
of
course, and I'm not saying that it's true. All you know is what the cops told you. That's the story that he heard from the cellmate. Maybe the cellmate is totally making it up, but if the police are going to tell you, then we have to talk about it. That's why we're talking about it. This is not something that you heard on the street. If it was something you heard on the street, we would not be talking about it in this episode. But because the police came to your family with it, then it becomes our responsibility to talk about it. That's the criteria, at least for unfound. So we have the story that Graham told in jail, but it's hard to match up then with him continuing to work with your father afterwards. kind of. But then on the other hand, it's kind of weird, I have to admit, that your father continues to work with Graham, even though Graham would certainly be a good suspect in Juanita's disappearance. So I can kind of look at it both ways. Once again, I'm not telling you what to think, Katie. It's just that's the way I kind of decipher it myself. And then we add in these other things that, your father was trying to get this money, that even after Juanita was missing. So just a lot of things going on after Juanita disappeared that don't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and they definitely sent up red flags for the police too. And my father's way of reacting to her going missing, it did not make him look good.
Yeah, that's true. I have to agree.
And so do I. And the cops agree with both of us.
All right, but just to put this on the record for your father is saying that he never saw Graham over at your house that day.
He said he was working down the road, and no, he did not.
So he could not. He said he's working down the road, so if Graham went over there, he couldn't have seen it. And he does once again know about Graham's confession about the stabbing in the car, etc. Your father knows about that.
Yeah, and I did talk to him, and my dad was convinced that Juanita was under the bathroom at Graham's mother's house, and that's where he heard she was. And he's like, I know that's where she is. And the cops never went there. And then I called the detective when I was preparing for this, the one detective that I've actually the one that I really actually like. I called him, and he's not a detective anymore. He's actually the head coroner in Santa Cruz County, and I got a hold of him. And he's always really, really nice, always answers my calls, And I asked him, I'm like, I just want to make sure that I do know some things, that I have some things, right for when I do this podcast, that you did you go to Graham's and search? And he said, we did. And, the cops have done a lot of things, and they haven't told us. We didn't know that. I just said, I called this detective right before Christmas to confirm that he had actually searched Graham Farmer's house, and I didn't really know it for a fact until a couple weeks ago. They didn't come to my house and say, hey, we finally searched Graham Farmer's mom's house, and we didn't find anything. They don't let us know anything, and I know a lot of it has to do with the fact that they didn't find anything, so why are they going to call and tell us anyway? But those are things that my mom, it's really, really hard for my mom because, they didn't tell us that they went out to interview him 4 years ago, too, in Louisiana. They don't tell us anything like that. And my mom really wished that the cops would kind of, let us know, hey, we haven't just totally forgot her and we are still doing stuff. But nothing's turned up. So in a way, I understand that the cops don't tell us. But then in a way, it really makes me upset too, because it's I would like to not have to wonder that anymore. And it would be really nice if you'd let us know.
I agree.
You guys are still doing
something. I think that they should at least let you know what they're doing. If they went and did something and it didn't pan out. Let me put it this way: if they went and did something and they got a piece of evidence, I can understand why they wouldn't tell you. Okay, because we don't know where that's going to go. But if they will go out and do something, if they go do a dig somewhere and they don't find anything, that does seem like something that the police would tell you, just to let you know what, we're trying to do stuff. 15, 20 years later, we're still looking to this. We don't want you to think that we've forgotten about it. So it does seem weird to me. I agree.
And that's where I go back to what I said earlier about how I feel like the cops, they dropped the ball too.
Mm-hmm. They do in most of these cases.
And I think, I think that there's some things where they're kind of covering their own tracks a little bit. I think that there's things that they did wrong, and they know that they did wrong, and they don't want us to know about those things either. So I think everybody's got a little bit to hide.
I can tell you, my listeners who have been listening to this program for 115 episodes know that we talk quite often about the mistakes that police make. Not taking cases seriously when the disappearances happen, trying to make up for lost time years later. It's very common. It's a very common story. It's common. And what made it even more difficult, in my opinion, in this case, is you were dealing with a young woman who had run away before. And so they think that she's going to come back. And of course she didn't. So, that makes it a very, very difficult case. And then you add in things, nobody saw anything, and it's a hard case to investigate. It just is.
Yeah.
But I want to ask you this.
They said,
please.
There was no physical evidence. Everything was
right.
circumstantial, and it's all hearsay.
That's right.
And there wasn't anything left. And there's definitely something to be said for the no body, no crime.
That's right. And given that she had tendency to run off, she could have run off. She could have. Could have run off and gone to some different town and figured out how to make it. Make it life.
No, but they did. There is a certain level of, I don't know if maybe some of the other families that you've worked with, if they've been able to obtain a death certificate.
Mm-hmm. Some of the cases I've covered, there's been death certificates issued. Sure.
In my sister's case, there has been a death certificate issued. So there has to be a certain amount of evidence for them to declare her dead and for my mom to get that certificate. So, I know it says she's missing and she's a missing persons, but the cops have reason to believe that she is deceased enough to issue a death certificate in this particular case.
Let me ask you this. We've talked about your father, who did some suspicious things. We have Graham, who obviously ended up being a convicted felon for abusing one of his girlfriends. Is there any other people who come to mind, or names have popped up in the last 20 years that could be connected, that could possibly be connected to your sister's disappearance?
There have been some people that were involved that the cops have the cops have gotten letters that people have, written on Facebook and sent to friends about how, this girl, she was pregnant and we buried her. And the cops have gotten letters from other people that were accessories in the situation. She mentioned the person that I had mentioned earlier that had the heavy equipment up in that area and how that person got rid of her. So there have been letters that they've obtained from people that ended up turning them in saying, hey, this person, gave me this letter, basically, admitting things. But once again, that's still just hearsay,
I guess what I'm asking is, we have a definite name. We have Graham Farmer. We have your father. Was there any other guy in Juanita's circle that could have been over that day, that she could have called to give her a ride, or could have walked down and met this person at the corner? Any other names that have popped up?
No.
Okay. All right.
Not in my opinion or in the cops' opinion.
Okay. It's probably always one of the toughest questions that I ask in any interview that I do, Katie. What's it been like the last 20 years?
Well, it was my freshman year of high school that the cops came and told us all this, and since then, I kind of I stayed at my best friend's house a lot at that time, and I think that my mom was kind of okay with it. My sister Holly and my brother Nick had moved up with my dad. My brother Nick had gotten into a bunch of trouble, and he's always been in and out of jail. My sister Holly decided to live with my dad, and so at one point, in my freshman year of high school, I was the only one that lived with my mom. My older sister Margie had already moved out, and she was living in San Francisco. And, my mom, I definitely, saw my mom, my other siblings didn't have to see like my mom, and my mom had to put herself into a mental hospital at one point, and I do have images of my mother, just like crazy enough to have to put herself into like a mental ward, you know? Um, I do, like I said before, I think that I had a lot of like guilt um, for like surviving, you know, and I
Mhm.
know that I tried to like find out who she was, and in doing that, ended up, I ended up following her path and putting myself through scenarios that I know that she had put herself through. Like I've done drugs, I have disappeared on my mom, I've hung out in dangerous places. Um, and I think that as crazy as it sounds, it's because I was just like trying to find out who she was, and in finding out who she was, I really definitely like put myself through a lot of things that I wish I hadn't. I've got a lot of regrets myself, you know.
Mhm.
Um, I put myself in a lot of dangerous places trying to ask what happened to her, and I definitely have said a lot of mean and hateful things to people that I was told they were involved. And I think that I definitely talked to the people that the cops told me were involved in it in a way that definitely didn't make them want to help me, you know?
Yeah.
I said things to them that they were probably like, why would I want to put you out of your misery? You know what I mean? And I think that I definitely made mistakes in doing that, because I think that the people that maybe could have helped me and could have told me what happened to her, I, instead of like going to them and like just begging please, I went to them and just said fuck you. And I feel like they were like, well then fuck you too, you know? And so I think
Yeah.
that I've made mistakes. I've made mistakes, and I've maybe made it easy on them to not tell me what I wanted to know, you know? I also feel like I feel like there has to be a point where I have to just really let it go so that I can like move on and just try to like tell myself that she's in heaven or she's in a better place, and like that she wouldn't want me to suffer like I have, you know, and my brother too, and my sister. We've all definitely put ourselves through some suffering. My brother was in and out of jail. Um, he's like finally now, he's like 33 years old, and he's finally started to get it together. But my
Mhm.
brother's also like has definite like anger problems. Um, I don't
Mhm.
think any of us got out unscathed. You know,
Yeah.
I think if I could do it all over, I would have definitely made a lot of different decisions for myself. And I definitely don't think that I made my sister proud. You know, I think that if she is in heaven, I've made her feel really, really bad for me, you know?
I'm not so sure about
And
that, Katie. I'm not so
yeah,
sure.
well,
I'm
you
not so
know,
sure. I
and
you should
I just,
know.
I
You should
don't know how to explain it, you know?
you
I
should
know
know that I
there's
talk
some
to a lot of
people that
people.
know.
Not
No,
I talk to a lot of people who have a lot of guilt. Seldom do I run into a case, of course, being that I usually talk to family members where the person doesn't feels totally 100% disconnected from the disappearance. All of my guests, once again, I've had bloggers and private investigators on, but family members, they all have at least some guilt about something they should have done, something they should have said, something that they could go back and change. I should have taken this more seriously. I should have known that this was going on. It is a very common thing. I don't know how common it is in our on the record interviews, but definitely behind the scenes.
yeah,
And so, what you're feeling here is very normal. I know it's sad. I know it sucks. It hurts. but it's very normal. Okay? I think that's very important for you to understand that. Even as you were 11 at the time, not much you could have done anyway, no matter what happened to Juanita, whether she ran off, somebody did something to her, we don't know. We don't know. But there's nothing you could have done at the time. And there's nothing that you can do now, I think, any more than you've done. It's not your job to solve the case. You can go talk to people. As people know, I'm behind the scenes. I work with a lot of former guests, giving them suggestions and everything, but it's eventually the police that have to do this. And it sounds to me that whatever happened to Juanita, whether she is alive now or she's not, I don't think that she would judge you too harshly, Katie. And
no,
I also
not. I don't think that. I just think that, you know, I don't know. I just feel like I wish I wouldn't have been so angry, you know, to like a lot of people. And I know what you're saying, that maybe there would have been nothing that I could have done, you know, that could have changed the outcome, because like the outcome is that they got away with it, you know. And so there's really nothing that I'm going to say to them that's going to make them feel bad enough or angry enough to, you know.
Well, we don't know. First of all, we don't know what happened to her, and second of all, if something did do something to her, just because it's 20 years doesn't mean that they've gotten away with it. Okay.
Yeah, no, I can tell you that I do know that, because a lot of the people that were said to have been involved definitely have done a lot of terrible things to themselves.
Yeah.
You know, and they definitely don't look like they've gotten away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, I mean, maybe, you know, they didn't end up going to jail for it, but they've definitely made themselves pay, you know. Mm-hmm. They're not in
all I'm
shape.
Talking about is, you know, the disappearance, if there was foul play, somebody having it pinned on them. Just because, once again, that hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean it won't happen. All right? And I don't want you to give up hope. But I also what I want to tell you regarding all of this is that, you know, and I find myself telling this to a lot of people who's on this program, on the program as well. It's okay to take a break once in a while. Okay? I don't want you to ever feel like, if you're getting, once again, emotionally caught up in this, and you're going to, that's natural. But it gets to the point where it is affecting other parts of your life, it's okay to take a step back. Don't think that, you know, Juanita is thinking, oh, you're giving up on me, or, you know, somewhere. You shouldn't think like that. Okay, you shouldn't. It's okay to take a step back and say, you know what, I'm just going to take a relax for 6 months. Okay?
And that is how I feel about it now. And for a long time, I felt like it was like you just explained to me, which is like Nina's like, don't give up on me, don't give up on me.
Yeah.
And now that I've done what I've done to myself, I feel like it's the opposite. And Nina's saying, just like, let me go, you know?
That's good.
Because she doesn't want me to. Because if I don't, like, it can really consume me.
Okay.
And, you know?
Absolutely.
And so I feel like now I feel like she is. I feel like that's what I have to do in order to, like, be okay.
Katie, you don't know how many people I talk to that, mainly for older cases, and I guess, 20 years. That's about the average age of a case that's covered on unfound, 20 years. And many of these people who have dealt with these older cases, they talk about how they took time off. They just had to give it a break, and some people, if you don't do that, then people get burnt out and then they never come back to it. And this is even parents. You have parents out these days who really worked hard at it for a long time and they got burnt out. And, their son or daughter who went missing is completely forgotten. And then they've gotten so burnt out, they're so emotionally scarred by it that they can't get back into it. And I really try to tell the guests that I work with, you have to avoid that. You have to take a very long-range approach to this. You have to be a marathon runner, not a sprinter in this. Because it could be that this could go on for a long time. You don't want to get to the point where you can't talk about it anymore. When somebody like myself comes along and wants to help, and you can know I can't do it. Those are the people that are burnt out, and I feel horrible for them, but I don't know. There's not much I can do. I feel bad for them, and so you're still a young woman. You're going to be on this earth probably another 45 years, 50 years. So, I hope that Juanita's case is solved tonight or tomorrow at the latest. But you just have to think long term, and worry about your own emotional health.
Yeah. And I have to just find peace either way because,
Right.
I also need to be okay with the fact that we might never find out. And
unfortunately, that's possible.
And
it's possible. But it's also important to understand if that is the case, not your fault. Okay? Not your fault. If that's the case.
Yeah.
Okay? Is there anywhere people can go to find out more about Juanita's disappearance? Do you have a Facebook page?
There is a Remembering Juanita Nelson Facebook page. There is also an unsolved, it's an unsolved detective. It's in Santa Cruz County. It's like Unsolved Homicide, Santa Cruz County. Facebook as well. And there's a couple different homicides that happened in Santa Cruz that are unsolved, that are on there.
Okay.
And then there is a Remembering Juanita Nelson Facebook page as well.
Okay. And do you manage that, or do you have somebody that's managing that?
My sister Holly had started it, and she had her friend help her. And then I'm going to get a hold of her friend so that I can get in on that because I'm not, I would like to help manage it. So I've been meaning, my sister is going to get a hold. I actually wanted to try to post this on it.
Okay.
If that's okay.
That's absolutely fine. That's what we do here. Okay, sure. Absolutely. All right, so the Facebook page and then the Santa Cruz page as well where Juanita is mentioned. Any last words before we conclude this interview, Katie?
Well, I just want to say that I really appreciate what you do. It's really comforting to know that there's people like you that are trying to get the word out there for the families and the victims of missing people. I'm really grateful to you that this is what you do.
Well, thank you. It's very kind.
I don't
Thanks.
see there's a lot of times, and this is something that my mom will say too. A lot of times people don't want to bring this kind of stuff up because they think it's gonna, hurt the person. And this has, when you guys did get a hold of me, it has, brought up a bunch of hurt and stuff, but it's also like really refreshing, and it's really encouraging to know that somebody out there cares and wants to hear about my sister. So I appreciate you.
I appreciate that. And the listeners want to hear about your sister too. They take a deep interest in these cases and they look into it for themselves. And what I want to assure you, Katie, is that we're going to know each other for a long time. Even if Juanita's case is solved tomorrow, you and I are going to be friends as long as we're on this earth. Okay, I can guarantee you that. Okay, and I'm just not a reporter. I mean, I'm going to move on to other cases, as everybody knows, week after week. But I keep in contact with, I'm going to say, just about 95% of the guests that have been on this program. Email, once in a while on the phone. We keep in contact. I give them some ideas. Sometimes we get together and brainstorm. And I would surely like to do that with you if Juanita's case is not solved soon.
Well, I'll be listening.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Great, that's fantastic. Thank you. And I appreciate you being on. I appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
I appreciate you having me, Edward.
You're welcome.
And that was my interview with Katie Nelson, sister of Juanita Nelson. I thank her for being on the program. Before I get into this summary, I want to make a correction to something that was said during the interview. At approximately the hour and 8-minute mark, I stated that Graham went to Idaho after Juanita disappeared. That is not true. He went to Idaho after the crimes he committed against his newer girlfriend, Kelly. As was stated in the interview, I spoke with Katie and Juanita's sister Marjorie. She is the oldest of the 5 children. She said many of the same things that Katie did. But as was also stated in the interview, Marjorie was already out of the house and had her own life by the time Juanita disappeared. Marjorie stated that she had a much different relationship with Juanita than the rest of the kids because she was older and could kind of see the path Juanita was on. She said that sometimes Juanita could be crazy, and Marjorie blamed it on the drugs she believes Juanita was taking at the time. Marjorie stated that she does not believe Juanita left for school that day. Marjorie also said that her main interest in finding Juanita is for the sake of her mother, because the way Marjorie looks at it, Marjorie accepts that Juanita is already dead. So it's not like Juanita is coming back to the family alive. So her family has already been damaged by this. And her attitude that is if Graham, for example, is the person who caused Juanita to go missing, it's not worth it, in Marjorie's opinion, to tear him away from his family and ruin their life too. Marjorie would simply be happy that Juanita's remains were found and that she could have a proper burial. And Marjorie doesn't care if anybody spends any time in jail for this if a crime was committed, especially if the person has a family as well. So the question remains, what happened to Juanita Nelson? Well, I think the interview with Katie showed that this case isn't straightforward. Yes, we covered the most well-known person of interest, Graham Farmer, and him going to jail for terrorizing and raping his girlfriend in the early 2000s sure does make him look like a good suspect. But I think we introduced a lot of facts that makes Juanita's father a possibility as well. I mean, if the police went to Oregon to dig up some property he had, then we have to talk about it. Yet we can't exclude the idea that Juanita simply ran off. She had a history of doing so. She could have decided this was the time to never return. On the other hand, each of those choices has problems. With Graham, yes, he allegedly made this confession in jail. But what he allegedly said makes no sense to me. Are we really supposed to believe he just happened to have a knife in his car? And that Juanita made no attempt to escape? Not to mention, was the car moving at the same time? You see what I mean. With Mr. Nelson, if he did something to Juanita, would he really leave her wallet and the food and the money sitting in his own house? That seems like a big mistake to make on his part. As for Juanita running away, those items left behind are a problem. Sure, she'd leave the wallet because she would have had no intention of ever calling anyone she knows again. But the food, the money, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And one more thing about all of this. As far as those meth heads saying they knew where Juanita was buried, I think that was just a ploy by them. I don't think they knew anything about where Juanita's body was. This is why it completely vanished from the court proceedings. As in so many cases, unfound covers, this is another instance of people on drugs just blabbering away. What I'm going to concentrate on is this. Now that we know Juanita was not picked up on her way to the bus stop or walking to school as has been published in so many places, we must examine the idea that she decided to not go to school at all, that Juanita decided she was going to stay home. Between having to ride the bus and calling her grandmother to say her backpack was gone, Juanita might have just said, "The heck with it, I'm not going." What this opens up is the possibility that she didn't disappear early in the morning at all. Maybe she disappeared at noon, or 1 p.m. or 2 p.m., because she was the only one at home, as far as we know. Also, all of those items that were left in the house tell me that Juanita left the house with every intention of coming back. She didn't take the food and money because she didn't go to school. She didn't take the wallet because she was only going out for a short time. And during that short time out, something happened. What it tells me is the list of possible suspects needs to be extended in this case. Yes, Graham is a good suspect. Yes, the father is as well. Yes, her running away will always be a choice until she is found. But now that the time frame in which she disappeared has been expanded, new circumstances certainly become possible. because the public info insisting that Juanita disappeared on the way to school has restricted the thinking on her disappearance to this point. With that, I'll leave the rest of the theorizing up to you, and thank you for listening to this episode where my voice was not 100%. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.